as well. And where's Lev gone? Lev, I'll pin you in a moment. It's 1 minute to go, so I'm going to leave myself on.
Sure.
I don't like doing it, but there we go. Hello, Claire. Hello, Claire. Yes, Lev is with us. So Claire emailed me earlier in the week and said, how do I join the conversation? Because I mentioned it in the letter. And I told you how, didn't I, Claire? And then you went, oh, I didn't know that Lev was going to be there as well. Because that's what we do. Nobody wants to listen to me rabbiting on. It's not about me. It's all about our authors. So we are joined by Lev. And lots of lovely people. Everyone's coming rattling in now. Hello, Dan. Hello, Matt. Hello, Matt. Hello, Caroline. Hi, Sian.
Fantastic pile of people. Brilliant.
Of course. We're a book club, Lev.
I know, I get it. Yeah. I understand the concept.
It's very fashionable. Right. Good evening, everyone. I make it 8 o'clock. So it's time for this month's conversation with our author. Now, I learned many things when I was a climber, and the most important thing I ever learned whilst I was climbing was to get your excuses in early, so that when you fell off, everyone knew why you'd fallen off. So I'm ill. End of.
Okay.
Just a cold, but I've got a proper head. Who knew you could still get colds? Anyway, I have a cold. My daughter passed it on to me. So I have a thick head all week, and it's still quite thick and fuzzy now. I'm not sure whether my medicinal beer, I can't even say medicinal. My medicinal beer is going to help, but I hope so. So there we go. For those of you who haven't joined before, my name's Tim. I'm Tim Freno. I'm the founder and curator of Adventurous Inc. And this is where we get together and we have a chat with the author, who this month...
Hey! And there he goes.
Is Lev Parikian, author of Into the Tangled Bank. Right, I can hear him laughing in the background. I know he's having fun. This is the way it goes. Hello, Lev.
Hi, Tim. How are you? I know how you are. You told me you're ill. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm not ill, so I've got no excuse for anything that may happen.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us, Lev.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking.
What folk don't, I've been trying to get hold of Lev and this book for a while, and just for silly reasons, emails getting lost and posts getting lost. It took a very long time to get hold of this book, but I'm so very pleased we did, because, well, I just love Lev's writing. I think it's fab, and I think it's so accessible and engaging and enthusiastic. For me, it's enthusiasm, and that's what we want. And as I was reading this, I got to page 15, and I was crying with laughter, and my family were like, "What are you reading now?" I was like, "It's this book." So I love it, and I did think, if I could write, this is how I'd like to write. So I'm honoured to have Lev with us this evening. I know it's a Sunday. I know it's slightly different. Lev is a busy man of an evening. We'll probably talk about
he likes to pretend he's busy.
So there we go. So welcome, Lev. This is the way we're. I'm rabbiting on here, but obviously everyone is free to ask their own questions as we go along. So if you want to ask any questions, please ask them in the chat or just comment in the chat. You're more than welcome to comment along. We're going to talk a bit about, we're going to talk about Lev's background. We're going to talk about writing and other writers that he likes and why he writes the way he writes. We're going to talk about, the natural world and kind of people who help take us into the natural world. We'll talk about some of the places that Lev goes on in his book, and kind of whatever else takes our fancy. So if there's anything in there that you want to ask questions about, well, then ask questions. You can ask a question now, or you can ask a question as we get to it. I will try and bring you in, or I will just ask you a question for you. Someone did ask a question last month, and I said, I sent them a quick message in the chat quietly and said, "Do you want to ask a question?" And she went, "I'm in the bath." So I asked it for her. So if you're in the bath, maybe just put a note on your question and say, "I'm in the bath. I don't want to ask it. Tim, could you ask this for me, please?" That would be good. Right. Anyway, enough of me waffling on. Lev, I wanted to know about the young Lev. Because you mentioned something which struck you mentioned lots of things which struck a chord with me, but you mentioned about a young ornithologist club badge which you weren't allowed to launder. I happen to have.
You've still got it, yeah.
A young ornithologist club badge which is on my camp blanket.
That is very impressive. Look at that. Observe
and conserve with the Young Ornithologist Club. Now, it doesn't exist anymore, does it? But
no, I mean, it's the YOC. You got a magazine every month, didn't you? And you read, and I found some copies of it, and I seem to remember writing in quite regularly and never getting my letters printed, which is the way of things. I think so many people would write in with their sightings, and it was quite a serious endeavor compared to the way kids are involved in nature these days. I think it felt, now looking back, it feels like the children who are in the YOC were treated as young adults rather than as kids. Does that ring a bell? Does that
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. So, and you enjoyed that then? You enjoyed being treated as a young adult who's into the natural world. That's how you identified, was it?
I think I must have done, but I think most of all it just tapped into my love of birds at that age, which I suppose, I can't remember when it started, but I can vaguely remember when it finished. It really seized me, I suppose, between the ages of 8 and 14, I should imagine. And I grew up in the countryside in a village in Oxfordshire, and my parents had a big book which might be familiar to people of a certain age, which is the Reader's Digest, or AA, Book of British Birds, which is a big thing with a fantastic illustration of a tawny owl on the front, and each page had loads of essays and interesting informative stuff that I didn't read, but it had also loads of maps and distribution maps and illustrations of the birds, which I did look at. And I got to know birds through that book.
Hang on. Well, Lev, yeah. I'm going to have to... Sian, is that really what you're holding up there?
Yeah, well,
can I bring you in? Hang on.
Yeah, sure. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. I was about to go and get my copy. Excuse me just for a second.
It's a beautiful book.
Wow.
It's just like
absolutely stunning. Should we just spend the hour looking at this book? But I'm going to show you, actually, as we've got it, I'm just going to show you that page, which you might be able to see. You can see my ticks. I saw a jackdaw, I saw a rook, I saw a thing. And there you can see that I saw a black redstart. I didn't see a black redstart. I was a great big porcupine. I never saw a black redstart in my life until about 3 years ago. So this book.
Sian, you've made my evening there, Sian. Thank you so much. I'm going to take your pin quickly. Sian, you're a legend. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm so pleased. It's amazing you mentioned this book and people do exactly that. Oh, I've got that, and they go themselves, or they say, I remember that. So that
you can see what a captivating image it's got. Yeah. They say you can't judge a book by its cover, but really, there's the book.
I mean, that is, yeah. Who doesn't love a tawny owl?
Tracy's still got hers as well. We're all there. I never had this. I've missed. I had the Reader's Digest book of natural history. Maybe a slightly broader canvas to work with, but it doesn't have such wonderful illustrations.
There's a story behind the illustrations, actually. Ray Harris Ching, who he had to draw all the illustrations in a year. If you think that's 300 plus British birds, and it nearly killed him. It caused him serious health problems, but they are absolutely beautiful things. Some of them are slightly unrealistic, because what happened was that he was sent these stuffed birds in the post to draw from, to paint from. So some of them are in slightly unrealistic poses because that's just the way they were, and he put them on his desk and fainted them, and he didn't have time to go over them again. It was just an incredibly quick turnaround. Anyway, so that was my introduction to nature, and I love birds. And then I suppose when I became a teenager, other things got in the way, and my life changed, and I became interested in other things. And it took quite a long time for that interest to come back, which it did, I suppose, in my mid-40s. And again, it was the birds that grabbed me in my mid-40s, and so in the last 10 years, that interest has really kind of grown and grown and grown and grown. And that, we're not going to talk about other books that I'm going to say, because it does lead to it. That was the subject of this book, Why Do Birds Suddenly Disappear, which was the story of my return to bird watching, and specifically the story of the year 2016, in which I set myself the target of seeing 200 British bird species. And it's relevant to Into the Tangled Bank because, having written that and having spent the year going around and really having a fantastic time looking for these birds and going to all sorts of different places, looking back on it, I realized that one of the things that I found most interesting about it was the people I met, as well as the birds I saw and the incidental wildlife that I came across while I was looking for birds, or quite often not finding birds, because a lot of bird watching is actually spent not bird watching and just sort of waiting for them to turn up. And so that gave me the idea, and I was approached by Elliot and Thompson to write a book about nature. And did we have any ideas? And we tossed some ideas back and forth. And I mentioned this to the editor, saying, one of the things I found interesting was the people as well as the nature and how they reacted to it. And so that was how the idea was born, of doing another journey around Britain. And really focusing on how we relate to nature, what our relationship is with nature. And so it got me thinking. It's quite a big subject, but that was the way into the book, really. And it comes from a position of somebody who's not at all spent their whole life interested in nature. Quite the contrary. Just about 8 years or so as a child, and now the last 10 years, so a small fraction of it. So that is the basis of it. And because it's such a big subject, I wanted to find a way of threading a narrative through it. So rather than just going out and slapdash and going, okay, oh, look, there's a person looking at a bird, and oh, there's a person looking at a flower, and all that sort of thing. I wanted to give it some sort of direction. So it felt like the journey could start on my own doorstep and then radiate outwards. And to give it some sort of structure, it occurred to me that, as well as my own journey, I hate the J word, but the journey, literal journey and metaphorical journey through nature and through people, I could trace through places a little bit of the history of naturalism, nature watching, nature observation in the country, by visiting the homes of some of the great naturalists of the last few hundred years. So that, there was a big map and a big spreadsheet, and I thought, okay, I can go to Gilbert White's house in Hampshire, I can go to Slimbridge, where Peter Scott lived, and so on. So that's the way I constructed the journey, and it just sort of went from very urban. I live in South London, in a very suburban kind of area, and very domestic, so in the home and the garden, and then gradually getting further away from home, and also incidentally getting wilder as it went through. So that's the story of the book, and now you don't need to read it. I've told you all about it.
Oh no, that's just the structure and framework. There's so
beginning. Yeah.
So I think the interesting thing for me, Lev, is the naturalists that you talk about were very much of their time, and I think your book is very of the time. I love the line, I'm going to be terrible at quoting lines tonight because I'm so fuzzy. But in effect, you say something about don't go rushing out in search of the otters and the eagles and dolphins and start on your doorstep. And you start literally lying on your local pavement, don't you? But that's very much of our time. That recognition that nature isn't something that's wild and that's out there. It's right here in our own homes, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's becoming more relevant as people get more connected to it, and also as they start thinking about the impact we have on the world. That actually maybe those big glamorous trips aren't, they are tremendously exciting, and I've been on them, but actually, as you say, it starts at home, and we can look and observe the things that are wherever we live. And derive a lot of interest and a lot of pleasure from them. You said about the people being of their time, and I think that's true. When I first started researching, I thought, okay, I'm going to make a list of all the people I might feature in this book, and the original list really centered around quite a lot of Victorian men. Because for a long time, those are the people who principally did study. That was the way of doing things, was to go out around the world, shoot things, and bring them back and learn about them that way. And in some ways, the most interesting of the people featured in the book is Peter Scott, because his life spanned those two eras, the old era of going out and shooting things. He was a very keen hunter in his youth at Cambridge, and of course his father was the great explorer, so he had that history of being a great adventurer. And during his lifetime, he converted completely and started the conservation movement as we know it now, depicted as this kind of these future ideas. He was a great artist as well, a great nature artist. And there was one, if you visit his house in Slimbridge, there is one painting that he does, which is a sort of apocalyptic vision of a nature-free future, which I think feels now incredibly prescient and ahead of his time.
When did he paint that then, though?
Oh, in the 60s.
Wow.
It was probably, I think it was the 60s, probably after Silent Spring was written, but but still at a time when a lot of people thought nature was it was going to be there all the time, and it was always going to be the same, and we had it in abundance. So that I found his story very interesting for that kind of reason, because of the way he straddled those two eras and actually spawned he was one of the instigators of what you might call the conservation movement nowadays.
But you did manage to find some women amongst all those
there were
dressed gentlemen, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. There was thinking of Etta Lemon, who was one of the founders of the RSPB, and Emma Turner was an extraordinary bold and pioneering photographer. And so there was tried to get some balance, but actually you look through the written the written history of it, of nature observation, and it is still largely dominated by stories of men. So I think that's a balance that needs to be addressed and changed, and I think it's beginning to be. Do you
think that gender imbalance coloured that with that documentation of nature? Do you think we would have a different understanding if it hadn't been so male dominated in the early days?
Yeah, I suspect we wouldn't have shot nearly so many things if it had been women going out and largely doing it. I suppose it's as with so many of these things, it's not that women weren't doing these things. It's just it wasn't wide. It wasn't put front and center. Their stories weren't told. They weren't telling their stories so much because of patriarchy. So that was. I mean, that's almost an incidental thing. It was something I was keen to make sure we had the balance somewhat redressed, at least, that it wasn't just stories of frock-coated Victorian men, even though, of course, you writing about it, you can't help but think about Darwin, and Darwin's house being pretty close to where I live. It was a fairly obvious place to visit, so it was instructive as well.
So obviously a lot of those people, they wrote about the nature that they shared, and you probably wouldn't like to admit it, but you're part of that lineage in a good way, not in a patrician sort of way. but where did the writing come from then? How did you go from this guy who'd kind of been into birds, went away from it, came back in your 40s, got back into it? But where did the writing come from?
It's one of those things. I think a lot of people have spent time in their life thinking, I'm going to write a book one day, and I shall do that. And I think I'd always enjoyed writing, usually short pieces, because I'm very lazy. So my pieces that I would write at school would always be they'd get the report something like, I do remember one actually, which was, I can remember it almost verbatim. It was an essay about something or other, some history thing. And I went off on about 48 different tangents in this one, just getting over the page of A4, double spaced and really wide. And it said, "This is typical of you, Parikian. It is funny and concise and extremely interesting, and it's completely unrelated to the topic you are asked to write about." So I remember, enjoying writing things when I was young, and then again, I just didn't. I was pursuing a careers in music as a musician. My father was a musician, a violinist, and I spent 10-15 years as a freelance orchestral timpanist and percussionist, driving around the country with a big van full of kettle drums and xylophones and so on. And teaching in schools and that kind of thing. And while I was doing that, I don't know if you know a lot about the life of an orchestral timpanist, but you spend a lot of time not playing, a bit like you spend a lot of time bird watching, not bird watching. So you get a chance to watch conductors. And I watched conductors, and I thought, well, I can do that. And I was interested in it as well. And I felt I was, something I could do. And I'd been told by musician friends that they said, you should do it, you should try. So I did, and it took my liking. So I have now spent the last 25 or something years as a freelance conductor, so the writing thing reared its ugly head when I was again reading books about conducting and realizing how terribly earnest they were. And they take the subject quite rightly very seriously, and they're always aimed at the young conductor wanting to be a conductor, and it's all sorts of full of technical advice. And what I felt was missing in this market was some sort of when you say things like a sideways look, it never bodes well, but a less earnest approach to writing about the mysterious art of orchestral conducting. So I wrote a few articles for a trade magazine, and then after about 6 or 7 of those, I realized I had the beginnings of a book, which I self-published in 2013. And then, as you do, I don't know, for a lot of writers, there's a drawer or virtual drawer full of unfinished projects. So I've got about 4 or 5 first 5 chapters of novels, which the first 5 chapters, by the way, are the brilliant, really easy to write. You just splurge it all out and you go, okay, this is fantastic. I've got this character here, and he's going to do this, and then he's going to do this, and he's going to get into trouble here. And then about 30,000 words in, you realize that none of it makes any sense. And so you then have to think, okay, well, am I going to So then you go away and you try and make it work. And the really dedicated novel writer goes away and makes it work and draws it all together and finishes the book. People like me just leave it and then go on to the next exciting idea they had, and they don't finish that one, and then they don't finish that one, and so on. But as my interest in birds came back in my mid-40s, the two things kind of coincided. I was looking to write something that wasn't about music, but I also was also getting back interested into birds, and so they kind of collided in 2015, I think it was, when I had the idea. Hold on, I can write about this burgeoning interest. And so I'd been reading a few books about birds, and I'd realised, of course, I'd learned a huge amount from them, and they were all. It occurred to me they were all written by experts, people who knew a lot about and were sharing their knowledge, which I didn't have. So the way of trying to make it as interesting as possible for myself to write and for other people to read was to have the story of a rediscovery of a former, a lost passion. And that seemed to work, and I certainly enjoyed writing it, and interspersed it with memories from my childhood and a bit of autobiography. So that's how it came about, and it's a bit like it feels like a disease sometimes, because you go, perhaps I should not write anything more, and then you get an idea, and okay, I've got to write this now because I've had the idea.
Oh no, keep going. Let the disease run rampant. Just to add, folks, if you've got questions of your own, feel free to chip in. In the sense of writing, the book it really reminded me of is this one, and this is. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to have favourites, but in the spirit of sharing, Rewild Yourself by Simon Barnes, which featured. Oh my words! This was years ago. This was sometime in 2018. Should have checked notes. But this is just a wonderful book, and it's 23 spellbinding ways to make nature more visible. And at first I recoiled against the spellbinding ways, because it's a bit of a conceit, isn't it? And he actually talks about them as spells, but the way he writes it is just the way that Lev writes, and it's so engaging. And I think that's the crucial thing. It's not talking down to you. It's like, I'm learning this and sharing this from a fairly humble perspective, rather than I've been everywhere. I've ticked all the birds in the Reader's Digest, genuinely ticked them all off. And spent many hours sat in a hide watching these things, so I know more than you do. And you don't get the sense of that from Lev or from Sam, and that's clearly something that means a lot to you.
It does.
To cultivate.
So there's the thing that I'm glad you picked that book, because I've known Simon Barnes' writing for quite a long time. I'm a keen sports fan as well, but also his nature writing, and I've loved it for, as you say, he's funny and personable and approachable. But you feel like he's talking to you, and you're just sitting there having a chat, and he's saying, "Oh, and this thing, oh, and this," and I don't know him, although we have had the occasional bit of correspondence on Twitter, which is lovely, and he's been kind enough to say that he's read at least one of my books and has enjoyed them. So that's kind of, wow, this is great. I live very near where he grew up. He grew up off Streatham Common in South London, and that is my patch, which I write about. And so I did contact him. The first contact was to say, "Hi Simon, you don't know me, but I live where you grew up, and I've just seen a red kite fly over Streatham Common." And he came back immediately and said, "A red kite, wow!" Because, of course, when he was young and when I was young, red kites were restricted to, I think, about 3 or 4 pairs in mid-Wales. And the idea of having one fly over Streatham Common was unheard of. But then they had the reintroduction scheme in, I think, the 1990s. So now you drive along the M40 and you'll see, in one stretch, you'll see more red kites than existed in the country when I was a lad. And that's something that I say every time we drive down the M40 to my son, who of course loves me for saying that every single time we drive down the M40. So Simon is, as I say, I don't know him, but I will freely say that I'm furious with him for writing that book, because it was literally an idea that I had for a book, and it came out. It came out about a month after I'd had the idea. So
it could have been worse, though, couldn't it? It could have come out.
I could have written it
after you'd spent a year and a bit writing it.
Yeah. And as you say, it's a terrific book, and it's not long, is it? I mean, it's, as you say, it's only 23 shortish chapters, but it's full of great, easy ideas and kind of easy knowledge. And again, he would say, I'm delighted that people liken my writing to his, and I find that very heartening, because it is kind of one of the things that I'm aiming for, I suppose, is trying to make the reading the book as enjoyable as possible and accessible as well, and as easy as possible.
And I think you've hit that nail on the head. There's some other writing that you introduce in here, and you sneak in a bit of poetry. Many of our authors sneak in a bit of poetry. So you sneak in a bit of John Clare, don't you? I loved the crowds of starnelds whiz and hurry by, and darken like a cloud the evening sky. So I love it that much. I even went out last night and dragged the family out to go and see if we could see a murmuration. And we went to the local nature reserve, and for a good half hour, they were like, "There's no bloody birds here." Well, there was wildfowl, but there were no starlings. And then all of a sudden, the starlings appeared, and they flew straight overhead and went to wherever they were roosting in the neighbouring nature reserve, not the one we were at.
Not the one.
I didn't get to. So that bloody went down the tube, didn't it?
That was like the time I went all the way to Snettisham to see the pink-footed geese, and they before dawn, and there's thousands and thousands of them on the mud flats there. And got myself up. I was not well as well. I got myself up before day, sunrise, and got out there, and I saw in the distance the first rising of the geese, and it's fantastic. And they only flew in the other direction, because they just got further and further. All I saw, the closest I got, was this sort of, and then off they went. So yeah, you have to be prepared for that kind of disappointment.
But we'll come back to that in a minute. But so, are you a fan of the poetry? Because it's quite the thing now, isn't it, to have a sort of poetic element to your prose?
It is. Well, my guilty secret is that I'm even though I do have the poetry of birds on my shelf, I've never naturally been drawn to poetry certainly as for something that I would write, or really to read. And I have learned to read poetry and kind of appreciated it more from having done so, rather than keeping it at arm's length and going, it's not something I do, I don't understand it. Just try and read things just to see what impact they have on you, rather than trying to understand. I felt that was quite important as a first step into reading poetry. But as I said, making this list of people's places to go and see, and John Clare struck me as quite an important person to feature, partly because he was very associated with a particular place, Helstone, in the centre of England. He spent nearly a lot of his life there, basically, hardly ever left. So, and he wrote about it with the intimacy of somebody for whom all the birds and all the animals and all the trees and all the flowers were his friends. And so there's that aspect of it. It was very particularly associated with one place. But also I was exploring the different ways that people have expressed their love of nature. So for him it's poetry. For Peter Scott it would have been painting. For Darwin it was really getting to grips with the mysteries of where everything comes from, which I think he did quite well, don't you? And so on. So that was part of the trying to give this journey a bit of variety as well, because it was also to do with the different ways not only we appreciate it, but show our appreciation for it. And it's interesting that, you know, Clare was a man of words, so poetry was his medium, and Scott was a visual man. He did write as well, but it's his paintings, his wildlife paintings that I think that he's probably known for, in that sense. And you know, David Attenborough, I don't actually talk about Attenborough in particular, but that does tie into one of the main ways that I think a lot of people experience nature, which is by watching nature programs on the television. And of course, David Attenborough is the supreme communicator of the natural world through our TV screens. But I do, you know, go into that a little bit about how does being a nature lover mean we actually go out and experience it for ourselves, or does it actually mean we enjoy watching Springwatch when it comes on, or watching The Blue Planet, or and how many of the people who have enjoyed those programs and would call themselves nature lovers because of it actually do go out and sit in a cold bird hide waiting for a shell duck to get up and flap its wings? I don't know. I just find it interesting those different ways we have of defining these this relationship. What was the question again? I've forgotten what the question was. About half an hour ago.
The question was about poetry, but you've segued beautifully into
the next thing on your notes. Yeah.
So hang on. Sorry, there's a question there. Alex, I'll come back to that question. I love that idea of you know, whether we're a nation of nature lovers or nature documentary lovers, and it's a strange thing, isn't it? And does it really matter? And actually, I think yes, it does matter, because you need to stimulate more senses to connect, I think, and I think it's brilliant that we've got such great things on the TV that can introduce this to us. But it can almost dull the senses, I guess, in that you go, well, I haven't seen any so and so's.
Yeah,
and actually going out and not seeing something seems to be such an important part of the experience. And you, I think you talk about this in the context of birdfulness, don't you?
That's right. The point I try to make in the book, which is spoiler alert, is that if we're raised on taking the Attenborough program as an example, if we're raised on the site of orcas making a kill, or a peregrine, which is a bird we can see in London. You know, there's nesting pairs now. There's paired near us, so that's a bird you can see. But our first experience of it might be an incredibly beautifully filmed and dramatic sequence that's been edited to tell the story of the innocent pigeon down below and getting on with its life, and the peregrine up on the Battersea Power Station or whatever it is, and it's directed like a scene from a movie with soundtrack which is like the scene from a movie, and they tell the narrative, and you've got the good guy and the bad guy, and then you get the kill, the extraordinarily dramatic thing. So you got 5 minutes, say, of this very striking visual and oral and everything and visceral thing. And then when you go, yeah, I'll go out and look at peregrines, and all you'll see is quite a distant bird sitting on a perch because it's actually had its food for that day and it's now not going to move for the rest of the day. The danger is that you're going to be disappointed because it's not like it was on the telly. So it's not that because I love all those programs, and I think they're amazingly well produced, but I just think there's a danger that it raises our expectations of what nature is going to be like. And as you say, that experience of going to look for things and maybe not finding them is all part of it, and to learn to embrace that side of it is, I think, fairly important. But the birdfulness thing. Do you want me to read, or shall I just talk about
Oh no,
it?
read, please read.
I read?
Like reading.
Okay. I've even got it bookmarked because I thought we are going to talk about birdfulness. So, let me just see if I can find it. So I've gone to there are two nature reserves. There are two nature reserves I go to within the M25 quite regularly, and one of them is the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust's centre at Barnes, the London Meadows, which is converted reservoirs that Peter Scott rang. I think the Thames, was it the Water Board, Thames Water? They were decommissioning these reservoirs sometime in the late 60s, early 70s, I'm guessing, I want to say. And he contacted them and said, I gather you're decommissioning these reservoirs. And they said, well, are you interested in buying them? And he said, no, I'm interested in you giving them to me. And in the end, he was such a persuasive man, I think he did get them to give them to him. And they are now the Barnes London Wetland Centre. So I'm there, and I'm in a hide, and I'm hoping to see a bittern, which is they usually have one or two wintering there, but nearly always hidden deep inside the reed bed. So you're lucky if you get a view. The hide is empty, which, without wishing to throw shade at my fellow humans, is how I prefer it. I've had many pleasant encounters in wildlife hides. Temporary friendships have been forged, information shared. I've learnt a lot. But sometimes all you want is solitude. And in that solitude, when all the elements are in alignment, a fine thing can happen. I don't have a single word for it, but in my head it is this: the particular calmness engendered by sitting alone in a bird hide, looking out on an expanse of water on which nothing particular is happening, but everything is happening. The fossicking of a snipe, the dabbling of a shoveler, the flitting of a loose group of starlings, the serene floating of a pintail, whatever it happens to be on that occasion. And not focusing on one element in particular, but letting the entirety of the scene wash over you and seep into your consciousness until the mind, at first so active and distracted, is becalmed, and your breathing slows, and soon the nothing of it becomes everything, and you slough off the cares and worries of everyday life, and just for a bit, all is well. Sometimes you focus on the activity of a single bird, that little grebe, say, floating insouciantly, then diving with a little jump and coming up 30 seconds later, 20 yards to the left of where you thought it would. Or you regard it as a game of Where's Wally, scouring the mudflats for the jack snipe someone saw earlier that morning. Or you just sit and allow the whole scene to wash over you, bathing in its peaceful glow. And sometimes, just occasionally, and only if you're in the right place, you might catch a glimpse of an otter, an actual wild otter. Not the tame ones that come out at feeding time because they know which side their bread is buttered, but a wild one that has writhed and wriggled its way to the water's edge just to be with you. Or that's what it feels like anyway. Water is, I think, an important component of this particular piece of mind resting. Everything is 10% better by water. We can theorize as to why exactly this is, whether it taps into our own composition or whether it's to do with the calming influence of water's myriad rhythms and shapes, or any one of another 1,000 reasons, or a combination of them all. But whatever the reasons, I regard it as fact. No doubt there's a word in German for this feeling, engendered by this particular situation. You might call it mindfulness if you're so inclined, a specific kind of mindfulness. Birdfulness, maybe. It doesn't always work. It's all very well wafting around the countryside saying, hello birds, hello sky, but we can't expect nature to make everything right just like that, and nor should we imagine it's a fail-safe. That places too much responsibility on it, too much pressure. Sometimes your mind isn't in that place, but today it is. 10 minutes into this visit, I have reached a state of 38% birdfulness. I wonder idly if the reported bittern is around. And now, as if conjured by the thought, it's there, morphed from the reeds themselves, treading gingerly on the ice, head forward, thick neck slung low. A most unbirdlike bird in many ways, an awkward, streaky tube of strangeness, the product of a margin doodle. It gives me just 5 minutes before sloping back into the depths. 5 minutes of the deepest satisfaction. during which I imagine Peter Scott's delight that his fantasy project has yielded such riches. Birdfulness level, 100%.
Lev, thank you so much. That's brilliant. I mean, you couldn't. I'm touched. I really am. Oh dear.
You're ill, Tim. You're in a weakened state.
I am in a weakened state, but I mean that sums up why I love this stuff the best. Right. So I'm going to have to ask. Yeah. Alex asked a question, and the question is: otters or eagles?
Oh, God's sake, both. Eagles.
No, I'm not having both. Come on, proper answer, please.
Eagles, sorry. Oh, no, otters. Sorry. Eagles.
Well, see, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's eagles, because eagles are birds. The birds are the best.
Yeah, I think the funny thing about the book is that you do have a good go at like embracing some other creatures, don't you? You give it your best shot.
And I do love them. And yeah, but they're
you're
not
a
birds.
bird, though, aren't you? Really?
I am. Yeah.
Would it help if we allowed you to choose between different species of eagle or otter? Does that narrow?
Well, I was going to say, a white-tailed eagle is the thing. Have you seen a white-tailed eagle? They are absolutely huge. The wings like barn doors, and amazing. We do actually see them in Into the Tangled Bank. We went to Skye, really almost to visit Gavin Maxwell's house, but also specifically to see white-tailed eagles and golden eagles, which we didn't see. But that's the thing. In Scotland, in the Highlands, are known as tourist eagles, aren't they? Because people will say, "Oh, they'll look up and they say, is that an eagle?" And the local will say, "It's a buzzard." But golden eagles are not dwarfed, but they're made to look smaller by white-tailed eagles. And there is that thing that people say is that until you actually see an eagle, you don't really understand. And then when you do see one, you will never think a buzzard's an eagle again, because the difference in size is just is really quite significant. So,
Claire said, "Have you played the board game Wingspan?"
Oh God, yes, it's brilliant, isn't it?
It's a new one on me, I'll be honest. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's really clever, and it's about birds. It's an American game, but it's now got a European expansion, and it's played with between 2 and 5 players, and it's a good, strong tactical game with lots of variation, so you don't get bored of it. It came out 2 years ago, I think. I want to say that. I think 18 months, 2 years ago, and we got it fairly quickly. And there was about a month where we played it most days. It's that kind of game, but it's lovely, and it's got beautiful artwork as well, and sweet little eggs that you put on the board. So I recommend it thoroughly if you like board games and birds. Wingspan. Yeah.
There we go. Recommended. Well, I'm going to look that one out. I have to be honest. So come on, we're 3/4 of the way through. How has that happened? How is it 9:15? I've got no idea.
I've been yammering on. That's how.
I think that's the nature of the beast. So you mentioned Skye there, and we've not actually really talked a great deal about the places that you went in the book. So so I got a real sense that you clearly enjoyed Skye because of the experience it offered and the white-tailed eagles. I also got a slight sense of a frustration at the kind of the honeypots and the popularity of Skye. And I got the sense you were more drawn to, now I can't pronounce it.
Oh, and I couldn't pronounce it until I went there either.
Go on.
It's pronounced Skokholm.
Skokholm, of course.
It looks like it's Skokholm, but it is from the same root apparently as Stockholm, but it's Skokholm, which is a small island off the Pembrokeshire coast.
So there we go. In the spirit of eagles or otters, Skye or Skokholm?
Oh, Skokholm.
There we go then. And why Skokholm?
There's no people there, is it? It's got 100,000 Manx shearwaters in the season. It's got two of the loveliest humans I know, Richard and Giselle, who are the wardens there. So I should explain, it is an island owned by the Welsh Wildlife Trust. I think that's what they're called. Wales, well, anyway. So and it is a bird observatory, and it was the observatory there was founded by Ronald Lockley, who was who wrote a book about it called Dream Island, and he'd lived on the mainland and he'd been looking for a dream island where he could go and live. So there's a long and involved history behind it, but really it's basically a 1 mile by half a mile piece of rock just off the Pembrokeshire coast, and you can go and stay there. They have, I think, just about 4 or 5 buildings, so you can stay there, and there's never more than about 20 people on the island at one time, and a lot of birders go there because in season, in the spring and summer, which is when it's mainly open, there are puffins galore and Manx shearwaters, as I say, and stormy petrels, and the wardens and the volunteers are spending their time monitoring and doing important scientific work, monitoring those populations and learning about them and all the other birds that visit. And what I loved about it, obviously, is the wildness and the closeness with the birds. When we went, it was in August, so the puffins had gone. But I would gather that if you do go there in the puffin season, sort of May, June, you will literally be able to have a puffin sitting in your lap as you sit there watching the.
I bet it costs more to go in puffin season, doesn't it?
I think it does a little bit, yeah, but it's not expensive. I mean, it's basic accommodation. You know, there's running water, there's electricity is thin on the ground. There's a 4G signal, but there's not much in the way of internet. So it's but it is a magical place. And the week I spent there, the way it works is that there's a boat that takes you there, dumps you there, say on the I think it's Monday, and then it picks you up again a week later. And you have to be prepared to extend your stay, a couple of days if necessary, because if the sea is rough, the boat can't go, so you'll be stuck there, which is no bad thing. And in fact, my wife and son were there for the first 3 days, I think 2 or 3 days, but they had the option of there was a storm incoming. So they said, you can either run the risk of staying an extra 3 or 4 days, and it was the beginning of the school term. So they actually left on the Thursday boat, and I stuck around like the selfish nature watcher that I am. And it was well worth it. And there's something about it that it is the lack of human habitation. It's the people who run it and the sheer number of birds there. So yes,
I have a theory about why you liked it as well, and I put this to you, Lev.
Go on then.
That so you talked about there being lots of serious bird research going on there, and Sian talked about in the chat, she talked about there being lots of serious bird research, but you mentioned something else, and I think this is quite important. And you mentioned, and I can't remember whether it was Richard or Giselle, but they say while you're on the island, you are to look and see what you can see, and that you note that down and you contribute that to the log. And that seems like a sort of equality of experience, and putting you all on a par and saying everything that you all see is important. And to me, that's you. So you like it because the island is a manifestation of your ethos about this. There's my theory.
I think that's a good theory. That is very much what I liked about their approach to it, because obviously they're professional ornithologists, and they know far more than I will ever learn. But there was not even the merest hint of anything excluding somebody who didn't know anything nearly as much as them. And as you say, all the observations are logged and taken seriously, and you're made to feel as if not only you're welcome, but your contribution or your presence is appreciated and valued. And if you just want to go there for a week on an island and just sit on a rock reading a book and looking out to sea and not say count the birds that you saw, then that's fine as well. So it's I think that was and also I think there was, I think I talked about it in the book as well, that the long-term volunteers are young ornithologists who are there to learn, and the way Richard dealt with them and just tease them to the next level in a very gentle kind of way. So they'd be ringing a bird, and one of them would say, so this and something about the bird, and he'd say, okay, so what do you learn from that? And then what do you infer from that? And without being overbearing, you would just gradually insist and make sure that they observe the right things. So it's just a terrific week all round.
It sounds, and it looks like you've enthused the community. Lots of folk are keen to go. Dan's pointed out that you can go to Skokholm nearby just for the day.
Yes, Skokholm does the day trips, and we didn't go there, but we saw it from on the other side of the water. So yes, if you want an introduction to that part of the world, then the day trips to Skokholm, and I don't know if I presume they've started up again. I'm not sure if people are staying on Skokholm. They certainly had obviously a terrible year last year, because they do rely on the income from people staying there to keep the place running. So it's an important part of their remit, I think. So it's tough for them. But I think the day trips are running again to Skokholm, so that would definitely be the place to go.
Alex asked in that sort of context whether you'd spent any time in the Scillies.
No, I've never. I want to go. It's never quite coincided, and it's been on the list of October things to do, because October is the big, the really good season, the migration season, and there's loads of birdies go there. One of my problems is, the great thing about Skokholm was that the boat trip is very short. The boat trip to the Scillies is not very short, and it is notoriously horrific. And I'm not a good sailor. I know you can fly there as well. So, but then flying, I don't know. So that one of the things that does slightly stop me from going to the Scillies is the thought of a 3-hour boat trip going up and down and up and down and round, and the horror that might be inflicted on me, which is soft.
I think Sian definitely is agreeing with you there.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about nature, but I think one of the places you started with the book is with the people who are looking at the natural world, and there's two fascinating encounters in your book, and there's one with the guy who turns up with his with his hoodie and his cap and his rough-looking dog, but is so keen on the natural world. And there's the other with the terribly well-to-do gentleman with his Labrador and out walking and
oh God,
clearly couldn't give a fig.
He was awful. I didn't quite go into as much detail as to how awful he was.
Come on, you can share now. This is your opportunity.
He was just kind of snotty. You know how you see some people and you go, oh, very condescending and patronising and snotty. But I'd much rather talk about the guy I met with the hoodie. It was interesting because I suppose it's my own prejudice that I expect, I suppose from experience, the people I have encountered looking at nature have been not of a type, but of several types, I suppose. And so when you see somebody exercising their dog, and the dog is quite a rough-looking dog, and you want to steer clear of it. And he, there was just my own prejudice made me think, well, he's not going to be interested in what I'm doing. But I had a pair of binoculars around my neck, and he clocked those and immediately struck up this conversation. And once we got going, I couldn't stop him. So it's just a lesson to myself, really. Don't judge people by appearances and all the rest of it. Because the bloke out in the country with the dog and the corduroys and all that, you might think, oh, he might be an interesting person to talk to, but he wasn't. He was horrible. So, yeah, it's just, in a way, I included those two examples. They're both dog walkers of different kinds, almost as a lesson to myself, as to remember that, people aren't always what they seem, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. Do you get a sense that we are becoming more connected with the natural world? Do you get a sense that we've got this greater passion for it, or maybe kidding ourselves about that? I don't know.
We might be. I think it certainly felt like it, didn't it? At the beginning of lockdown, there was this kind of amidst all the horrendousness of it, there was this, because it was the perfect spring weather-wise, wasn't it? It certainly was in London. I can't remember don't know what it was like up with you. I think pretty much universally it was good weather and blue skies and warm. And of course, it coincided with that bit of spring where the bird song is getting louder and beginning to add layers, and more birds are singing. And the number of people I know who know that I'm interested in nature, and but they aren't necessarily themselves, but they got in touch and said, oh, I noticed the other day I heard this bird singing, or have you noticed the bird songs louder? All of that. And I think that's a common story. I've heard quite a few people say this, but at the time it felt like, oh, this is an opportunity to spread the word even more. But I wonder, there's no research into it as far as I know, but I wonder whether it has stuck. Maybe it has. Maybe it was like, if you for a while you immerse a sponge in water and it's saturated. So that was then when people were really interested, and then gradually it's been squeezed out, but there's still some residual moisture in there, and that will, with any luck, grow. I think that's a terrible analogy, but I hope what you mean. I hope you get what I mean.
I do, Lev, and I guess everything's cyclical, isn't it? Nature moves in cycles, and we ebb and we flow, and I think it's understandable that people would look to find comfort in the things that remained, and nature was clearly something that, and would then, as soon as they're released back into the world, the normal world, would kind of maybe rush back to other things. But I think that experience has been shared broader, and I think it will pull people back. A little like yourself and myself, we've both obviously been on a similar journey where we had that young ornithologist badge, didn't we? And then both of us spent a good few years away from the natural world, and now we've come back to it with a vengeance. You're writing books, I'm sharing books with people, and I think that's part of that cycle, isn't it? We're part of that to and fro, and I want to believe that there's something that it remains in that connection that brings us all back in, and if there is, I genuinely think you can have helped more people find that connection and find that way back in. Our hour is up. It's been a wonderful hour. I've really enjoyed it.
I think.
Thank you so much for the book, Lev. Thank you for this. Thank you for the reading. But yeah, just thank you for kind of putting an arm around our shoulder and saying, have you seen this? Isn't that cool? Or wow, look at this. There's a bit where you're on, I can't remember how to pronounce it, Skokholm or Skokholm, when you're on Skokholm, and you talk about gently cupping the storm petrel in your hands. Then you have to let it go, and you put it down, and you hope it goes off in the right direction. And I feel that's like all of us. You've kind of cupped us in your hands. We've read your book, and now you come to the end. I genuinely felt sad at the end of the book, and you've put us down and you've let us go, and you hope we go off in the right direction.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. That's very kind, and it's very lovely to think that people getting something from the book. I mean, I think you talked about my writing style. What that comes from, it comes from a horrendous fear of boring people. So I want to try and, the worst thing is a book that is boring. So I try and make it as light and pack it with loads of sort of interesting facts and silly jokes and that kind of thing. And if it appeals, then it appeals, and if not, then
wow.
Stop reading and read something else. I would definitely advise you to do.
Absolutely. We couldn't say more, but I think for most of us it appeals. So thank you. Very few of us who are bored. Lev, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm gonna jump back in. Right, amazing. Lev,
brilliant.
Thank you so much. There's some lovely comments in the chat.
Thank you.
One of my favourite Zooms so far. Thank you, Sian. Look at that.
One of.
Hang on, if I take myself off there and do this, we should be able to see everyone there.
I can see. I've got the chat here. Feeling you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And yes, sorry guys, I know this one arrived a bit late. I know the conversation is slightly early in the month, but like I said, I think you can share Lev's passion without having to read all of the book.
Indeed.
And that enthusiasm is there, and if anything, I think it probably helps you go, oh, I can't wait to read some more. I genuinely hope that's the way it's been. Well, there we go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
everybody for sitting there for the whole hour. Brilliant.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Zoom wave, everybody. Zoom wave.
Oh, dear me. I can't. Oh, I'm too tired to take this.
Go to bed. You need to get yourself a hot toddy and go to bed.
I can't do that. Lev, it's been brilliant. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading the book. I've enjoyed having our conversation. Maybe we ought to feature another one. I don't know.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to go. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.